Welcome to another episode of Growth Hacker TV. I'm Bronson Taylor, and today I have Rob Walling with us again. Rob, thanks for coming on the program for a second time.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Rob, you are a serial entrepreneur, and I would recommend people go and listen to your last episode on here. It's personally one of my favorites, and I've had other people tell me it's one of their favorites because it was just so action-oriented. I mean, it kind of went through a boot camp of growth and what the stages of growth are for a bootstrap company and how to think about growth and some of the hiccups that people experience. And it was just chocked full of really good advice. And we actually read an email that you sent out about your new product, Drip. And when we read the email you sent out, we said, we got to have him back on because he is currently going through a growth gauntlet and he's being tried and he's learning a lot. And that's when I want to get people on the show, when they're in the middle of learning a lot of really cool stuff. So again, thanks for coming on and talking about your growth gauntlet.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good way to put it. It's I think gauntlet makes it sound noble, because it's tough right now. I'll admit,
it's not failure; it's noble.
That's right.
That's what
right.
it is.
Yeah.
All right, let's start by talking about gambling. And I didn't just pull that out of random here. I want to talk about gambling because that was kind of the theme of this email you sent out to people about Drip. And we're going to get to the details in a minute of what you call the biggest gamble of your career, and that'll be our hook. You'd have to stay around to hear about what that big gamble is. But let's talk about gambling and entrepreneurship kind of in general for a second. What are some of the big gambles you've taken up to this point to get to this point?
Yeah, there's obviously too many to list because I've been doing it for 12, 14 years, depending on how you count. But for me, I tend to be, I don't love risk, which sounds funny coming from a serial entrepreneur, but especially early on, I was really timid about taking risks. So the first time that I started doing freelance work on the side, to me that was a gamble. Just to take that time that I previously had for other things and investing it into working for someone else on my nights and weekends, that was a big deal. When I then turned that into, I quit my day job and I started a small consulting firm, and that felt like a big gamble, especially since I had a wife and kid at that point. Then investing all my side time into building products, making the leap into products is always a gamble of some sort or another, right? Whether money or time or both. For me, it was both. And then taking that and parlaying it up into doing what I did last time I was on the show, which is, I spent $30,000 buying a rundown SEO keyword tool, a SaaS app called HitTail, and 30 grand was a huge chunk of money for me. It was most of what I had in the bank, and so it was definitely a big gamble. And then I spent another 15 or 20 to rehab it. And technically, most recently, just starting over again. I mean, I still have HitTail, but then I said, all right, let's build one from scratch, which is just, as you said, it's a gauntlet. It's always a painful process, and I always forget how painful it is, but that's definitely a gamble. I could start Drip and just not have success. And that's a big gamble for me at this point, because not only am I betting time and money, but I have a personal brand. And if I launch Drip and completely flub, it's not like I lose all the luster, but it's like, well, I think people would start to question,
Yeah. And
whether I have it anymore. So
absolutely, it's tough all around. And as you look back at your career, it's a history of taking risks. It's a history of taking gambles. It wasn't a one-time thing. It's almost like every couple years there's a new gamble that, if you're honest with yourself, you have to take it, but it's hard. Entrepreneurship isn't about I made an initial decision and now it's easy because I crossed over. You have to keep making that risk. So here's my question, which is, why is taking that risk, why is taking that gamble so important on an ongoing basis for an entrepreneur? Why can't they just make the one risk and be done?
Now, it's a really good question, actually. I think that for most entrepreneurs, you could feasibly take one risk. Like, imagine a scenario where you took the risk and you left and you started this company and it did really well, and you just run that company for the next 40 years and retire with it. And maybe 37 Signals only felt like they took one risk and were done because they've the company. But entrepreneurs I know don't do that. They get bored with it, right? They just want to continue growing and pushing forward. And if you're not taking risks, you aren't learning, which is not very interesting, and B, you aren't like adapting and growing, which is not very interesting, and then C, you're not pushing boundaries, because
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneurs love to do that. And maybe 37 Angels is not a good example of that. I'm trying to think if they are. But yeah, without risk, you're just kind of doing what everyone else is doing, right? Risk is stepping outside of the status quo. And as entrepreneurs, that is what we do. Whether it's even, the status quo in our world, in our startup space, is to start something, but the status quo for the rest of the world is not. And so when you're at a cocktail party and you're talking about starting a software company or spending your nights and weekends doing it, I still get people questioning what I'm doing, and I'm like, dude, I'm okay, I'm not working out of a basement. So that's where risk comes into play.
It reminds me of stuff I've read about kind of the stretch zone, that, when you want to get into a state of flow, which is where you are growing the most, learning the most, kind of moving forward the most personally and as a company, it's when things are just beyond comfortable, but not so bad that they break you. So you're taking these risks that stretch you just enough that you have to do something new and have to learn, but they don't stretch you so much that it's debilitating and depressing. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, it is. That's exactly it. And there's a concept in psychology called the Yerkes-Dodson curve, and it is very similar to that. It's about how a bit of stress is really good for motivation, is really good for productivity, but it's a curve where the more stress you get, the higher productive you are, and then you hit a point where you have so much stress that it's debilitating, right? And then it knocks you out. And that's more situational, that curve, but I agree. I think it applies over the long term. And risk naturally introduces stress, right, and anxiety, because there's uncertainty. So
it's really managing kind of the amount of risk, the timing of risk. Just the whole thing is really about knowing yourself and being able to, put the right amounts of risk in your life. Now, let me quote something you said in the email, because I like this so much. You said, "The more gambles you take, the better you become at reading the tea leaves and figuring out if your next gamble is going to work." I read that. It resonated with me. I loved it. I want you to break it down for me. What do you mean by that?
I guess, it sounds like you become better at seeing the future, but that's not really what I meant per se. What I meant is that I think you become better at judging risk and at mitigating your downsides when you take risk. All the first projects I did, there was so much risk that I didn't know what I didn't know, right? The unknowns that just eat you alive. And now going into it for the 10th time or whatever it is, it's just I have an idea of how things are going to go. And I also have an idea not only just of risks that are going to crop up, there's going to be market risk. Does anyone want it? There's going to be marketing risk. Can I find a channel? There's going to be product risk. Can we build it? Evaluating those things, the basics. But it's I'm having trouble coming up with it, but it's it is sorry, totally lost my train of thought.
I mean, it totally makes sense what you're saying. You don't know the future. Nobody knows the future, but you become a better risk taker. It's kind of going back to what we just said before. You know where that zone is where it makes sense. You know where the zones are that might lead to success as opposed to the ones that might not. You don't know the future, but you do develop a sense that you just didn't have before.
Yeah, that's right. And the other piece of that is that that how hard it's going to be. You have an idea that it's going to be a struggle, and so when you're in that learning phase, I talk about building, learning, and scaling as the three phases of an app, right? The building phases tends to be fun because you're writing a bunch of code. The learning phase is really long and really hard, and it's always longer and harder than you think it's going to be. And then scaling, once you're doing it, is you're sprinting, but it's fun because you're getting a lot of success and you're scaling up and you're getting more revenue. So knowing that learning phase is going to be long and painful helps. That's a risk that you're going to quit, right? There's a big risk you're going to quit during that scaling, during the learning phase. And so that alone, just knowing that, is what I mean by being able to see it through,
Yeah, it's not your first time at the rodeo. You know it's hard.
Yes.
And so you kind of prepare yourself mentally for what is going to come. Where someone else, if it was a first time, they might have the same risk tolerance as you, but where they never experienced it, they might give up. Where you knew months leading in, this is what's around the corner, and it's going to be hard. No, I mean, it makes total sense. All right, so let's tell people about kind of your current risk. So you're building Drip. You built Drip. You launched Drip version 1.0, and it was a good product. I mean, it did a few things really well, but all wasn't well, right? As you said in the email, the churn was too high. And I like how brutally honest you are with yourself. That's something people can learn from. It's hard enough to say to yourself, churn's too high. it's really hard to put that in a public email that a lot of people are going to read that my churn's too high. But that was the situation, and it is what it is, and that's the kind of person you are. It is what it is. Walk us through what was going on with version 1.0. You're seeing the churn too high. What is the chaos of 1.0 at that point?
Yeah, 1.0 was well received. I got a lot of folks interested in it, and people were trying it out. Had a lot of paying customers, low triple digit paying customers right off the bat, which was great. But it wasn't differentiated enough from everything else. Like the question I kept getting is, do I need to leave MailChimp and Aweber? Drip is email marketing software, right? And it started off as just an email capture form and a really easy way to build email sequences. Now it's a lot more than that. But I kept getting the question, is this different than Aweber and MailChimp, and should I leave Aweber and MailChimp? And there were just so many questions over and over that I realized no matter how well I explain this, I've already lost if they're asking that question. And so that was it. We just had the product, did solve a pain point for some people, and we had a nice chunk of revenue. We had enough revenue that had I been building it myself and working a day job, I would have quit. There was enough there, but it just wasn't growing fast enough. And even though I was sending a lot of traffic to it, I would get new signups based on the intrigue of it, and then enough of them churned out that it's like, this is not going to scale.
Yeah.
It's not going to scale.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, your taste for success grows the more you do it.
Indeed.
So it would have been okay 10 years ago, but you're not in a place in your career where that's okay right now, right?
That's right. Yeah, I've become more I'll say I become less patient as time goes on, right?
Yeah.
I want to have that success faster because you've had a taste of it before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Now, the users actually told you what they wanted, which is a cool thing. They were saying, I needed to do this, I needed to do that. They were almost giving you a roadmap of what you would need to do for them to not need MailChimp and not need Aweber and just kind of come to your platform. First, what is it they were requesting? So maybe now you can dig into the gamble because they're requesting some hard stuff.
They were, yeah. In essence, there was a lot of requests. It's hard to. It wasn't as easy as everybody saying the same thing.
Sure.
You get 300 people who run through the app, and you get 300 different feature requests.
Mm-hmm.
But what I started seeing was some patterns of people really wanting. Basically email automation, like marketing automation capabilities, where they could put someone into a sequence, and then if they clicked on a certain link or if they did a certain behavior, then you could move them into another sequence based on behavior. Yeah. And this is a common feature in tools like Infusionsoft, which are $200 or $300 a month and up, and Ontraport, which used to be Office Autopilot, and Marketo and HubSpot and Pardot. These are all big marketing automation platforms, and they cost between several hundred a month and several thousand a month, and it's a crowded market, but it's also a lucrative market. And so just being able to build that was going to take a few months at minimum. And we had to refactor the database before that. So it was a 60-day refactor and then several months of development. So that was where I was hesitant to, do we really want to dive into this? And do I want to be in that space? That was the question.
Yeah, because, as a bootstrap entrepreneur, you kind of mentioned it, but basically what it comes down to is you were going to be competing in a crowded market with funded companies. It was not an easy strategy what you were getting ready to conquer there. Now you decided to go ahead and build this new version 2.0. You decided to kind of jump into the marketing automation world. And I know that I'm assuming that you thought you probably had an edge because Marketo is really hard to use, and so is Infusionsoft, and so is HubSpot. They're very complicated products that extremely large companies use, but not a lot of mid-size and smaller companies. Is that where you thought maybe you had an edge, is you can have marketing automation for a slightly different crowd? Yes.
Yeah, that was the idea, is to make it lightweight, to make it easier to get set up, to make it a little less expensive, though I don't want to compete on price. That's a race to the bottom. But it's really to make it easier to get set up, easier to manage, and just not be such a hassle. If you've used Infusionsoft, it's older software. It was not built by software developers. It was built by marketing people. And so the UX is not fantastic, as with most of the enterprise packages. In addition, you try to do Marketo or Pardot, and you have to talk to salespeople and go through a whole process. And Infusionsoft has that $2,000 upfront fee. So it still very much is an older model. It's that older enterprise sales model. And while there are certain apps cropping up in the space, I wanted to make brain dead simple startups. There are enough of us out there that are trying to do this now. I truly believe it's the future of email marketing, that just sending static email newsletters to people is going to really decline in the years. That I think there's a substantial market here for it for
Yeah.
some easy to get set up.
No, I mean, when I read the email, it clicked with me too because, I was on kind of the beta list. I wanted to see it when you launched it. And I remember going to it and kind of seeing what it does. I was like, it's clever. I like it. I mean, you have your, little toaster pop up at the bottom or wherever. People can
Yep.
answer a question, type in their email address, whatever. It's kind of like a Qualaroo, but then it connects you back into the email drip. And I was like, there's something about that's cool. But then I didn't buy it. I was like, I'm going to need something that does a little more than that if I'm going to make this a part of kind of my engine, a part of my, flow. And when I read the email about where it's going, then I was like, now I'm interested because hooking up all that stuff is something we did by hand, but I don't want to do it by hand. It is not fun going into Mandrill and triggering everything myself with the event, kind of notifier, and then writing these emails in HTML and putting them in, like, it's not a fun process setting up all these things. And I would like an interface to make that easy. So it made sense where it was going. Let me ask you this, though. How's the gamble paying off so far? Because now you're a few months into kind of saying, okay, bite the bullet. I'm going to build this complicated thing.
Yeah. So the initial gamble of just building it, I was hoping we could get it done in a couple of months, and it took 5.5 months, which is painful because we were kind of standing still during that point, trying to get it built. I wasn't able to market it because I didn't want to market the old product. I knew that the old product was churning out, The old product would have been fine. Again, it's that taste of success thing. I wanted to get bigger faster. But knowing that the new features were really going to resonate with people, I wanted to put the pedal to the metal. So during building, it was pretty painful. But as we were going, about every 2 months, or about 2 months in, we started releasing some small pieces of the marketing automation. And then a month later, we released another piece. And it was just one trigger at a time, one action at a time. Mm-hmm. And right away, I saw no one said anything. No one, emailed. No one, I don't know. It wasn't like a noticeable thing, but the churn started going down. Mm-hmm. And the monthly revenue started rising after been flat maybe 4 months after launch. And it just started ticking up, $1,000 a month, $500 a month, and at this point we're almost double where we were, last in November when we first launched. So, and churn is way down. So I know based on just past experience, that I think we're going to start hitting our stride here pretty soon, and the scaling is just on the horizon. So it feels like the gamble has not paid off yet. I'm pretty conservative in saying that. I'm always cautiously optimistic, but I am really optimistic that this gamble is right on the cusp of going up. It's not a hockey stick yet, but it's just like doing this, right? So
you can see where it's going.
Yeah.
So one of the things I wondered is I thought about taking risk in the conversation we're going to have today was, some entrepreneurs take risk that are really stupid. From the outside looking in, it's stupid, but under the banner of entrepreneurship, they feel justified. Others, like yourself, they're calculated risk. They're gambles. There's no guarantee it's going to pay off, but at the same time, you're kind of in that stretch zone. You're not, way beyond it, like we talked about before. How can someone identify which camp they're in so they know if they need to take more risk or less risk, or how to kind of view that whole thing? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think the first part of it is knowing yourself, of course. It's like you're going to learn over time, which camp you're in. But I think that the thing to notice is, are you putting, when you have failures, how catastrophic are they? When you have a failure, did you lose your house and almost break up your marriage, or do you continue to have, friends who don't want to be around you because, you have these catastrophic failures, or you have significant others or spouses who you've had issues with? When it starts impacting your life in a majorly negative way, then perhaps you're taking risks that are too big. Now, hopefully it wouldn't get that far, right? That you got divorced and lost your house and all that. But there can be early signs of that too. And it's tough to gauge because it's if your family, I would say listen to your family and friends, but unfortunately they aren't necessarily, sometimes they are not the best gauge of risk. They want you to be super conservative and go to law school and work for a company for 40 years. So you kind of got to use your judgment there. But I've always felt like when I'm comfortable with the risk that it's something I can go with. But then again, I'm more of a conservative player, and I know that. So but I think it does come back to knowing yourself.
No, I think that's a great answer, because I think about, my wife when I was, getting ready to launch a product a few years ago, and her response was, "You're going to launch another product? Is that a good use of your time?" To her, it didn't make sense to do it again when it hadn't been working for me. But I knew that product was the way to kind of get things going in our life. But at the same time, we had a great relationship, It didn't affect our personal life. I went to work. I built the product. It wasn't a failure that affected us. And so she wasn't necessarily in favor of it, but it didn't affect us negatively. And now she's really glad I kept building products,
Right.
So I think there is something there where you can't necessarily listen to the details of their advice, but if it's affecting all the relationships in your life, it's telling you something more than what their specific words might be telling you.
That's right. And I think the second opinion that I would go for is someone in our community, the startup community. It's like have that mastermind group or have that couple of friends who could lend a little bit of sanity to it. Now, they may tend to be less risk averse, whereas your spouse, might be more risk, but you can kind of balance those two then, right? If all three of those are saying too much risk, then you're probably taking too much risk. And if all three of them are totally fine with it, then maybe you're not taking enough type thing.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great thing right there. Now, as you kind of look back at the drip experience, and it's an ongoing experience, there's going to be new things learned and new corners that you have to turn, but so far, what are the big takeaways from you personally? Because you've learned a lot with all of your startups, you've taught a lot at your conference and in your books and things like that. What is it you're going to walk away from this experience with so far that's going to make it into your next book?
Oh man, yeah. I really did the customer development and the slow launch that I did, it worked. Like it was good stuff. It got me to revenue, and it got it to a place where I was, if we had launched at $1,000 a month or something, it would have been catastrophic. Like I would have thrown in the towel, or considered doing that. So to launch and get a good chunk of revenue right off the bat, even without the initial growth after that, that's something that I would do again. And then another thing is that the learning phase, I talk about building and then learning and scaling. This learning phase, I've already said it once here, but it's like it is always longer and harder than I think it's going to be. And I'm just coming out of that, and I can see that there's just kind of darkness envelops you as an entrepreneur. You're just struggling like, why is it taking so long? Why don't I know who the customers are? Why don't I know how to reach them? Why don't I have the features built that they need? So that part, like, know that that's always going to be, in general. I mean, if you came up with a rocket ship idea, obviously the learning phase is very short, and then you kick up. But most of us don't. So
it's kind of like all the action movies where there's some there's the hero that has to go through this dark phase before they can be the hero. I mean, it's the epic that every movie follows. It's Star Wars, it's Gladiator, it's everything like that. Entrepreneurship is like that. There has to be this valley of darkness, and so many people quit when everything gets really, really dark, which is fine because it means that it's opened up markets for the rest of us that know how to persevere through that really dark place. But you have to, like you said earlier, you have to know going in that even you might feel like giving up, and that's a part of the psychological game. And if you can get to the other side, some good stuff's going to happen.
That's right. I think the one other thing that I continue to learn with every app that I launch is that this is the fun part. I have to tell myself that over and over. What you're doing now is the fun part. If it's not the fun part, don't do this and go be a normal person. You know what I'm saying? Like we are not, as entrepreneurs, we are taking illogical risk always, and we're always putting a lot of ourselves on the line, both psychologically and time-wise and money-wise. And so if you're not having fun, and you're not, in a broader sense, right? Every day is not going to be like, a trip to Disneyland. But if you're not having fun in a broader sense, then really don't do this, And so that's what I'm telling myself. It's like, this is the fun part, man. I'm hanging out in an office with a couple of cool guys making some really cool software. This is fun,
anytime I think I might give up or things get dark, I just take a real good, like, kind of imagination journey of what cubicle life really is. I think about TPS reports, and I think about the boss that I have to go to their meetings, and I have to sit through it, and I have to nod, and I have to smile, and I have to say yes, and then I have to go work on something I don't believe in, for a company that doesn't care about me, for a product that doesn't matter. Like, it's a really bad life when you're an entrepreneur, when you're meant to be an entrepreneur. So whenever it gets dark, I just realize that somehow it's actually more dark in the rest of the world, and then I keep going.
Well, I've been there. I worked in corporate America for several years, and so I can totally think back, and I do at times like this.
Yeah. Well, this has been another awesome interview. I'm going to end with the same question I ended with last time, because it's the question I always end with, which is, what's the best advice you have for any startup that's trying to grow?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I'll say that you have to lay the groundwork before you can grow. Like, growing once you get there, once you're past all the learning, is actually not that hard. It's being willing to invest the time both in yourself early on, because when you start, you know nothing, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to learn the marketing stuff. You have to watch Growth Hacker TV. You have to watch Mixergy. You have to read the books. You have to go to the conferences.
Starts for the rest of us.
Yeah, right? I mean, you have to put in the time and you have to learn the stuff. So that's laying the groundwork in you. Then if you're going to launch an app, you have so much groundwork to lay before it's going to grow that you have to be willing to travel that long journey, that long, forever, endless desert of learning that I keep talking about in order to get to the growth.
Yeah, well, that's awesome advice. I mean, it is really a process, and it just, no matter how much experience you have, you can't shortcut the process. Even if you make it more efficient, you can't shortcut it. So I think that's a perfect advice to end on. Again, Rob, thank you so much for coming on Growth Hacker TV.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.